First of all, I wanted to welcome everyone to the webinar and thank you for attending. I hope the topic is one that's relevant for you. And I know there's going to be some time at the end to answer some questions. So if you have something specific, definitely save it for that time. So first thought, I don't think this is anything new for anyone, but just wanted to mention it. Data is really foundational. And so if you look at, I created a list here of some of the buzzwords that I see all over, like my LinkedIn feed as an example, in terms of different initiatives companies are taking or different things that they aspire to be. In the example of like the data-driven organization, all of these different projects and things and words all have to do with data. So GDPR is a regulation about data. Privacy, you hear about all the different breaches, they have to do with data and security as well. Security, what does everyone want to secure? They want to secure their data. And then there's some things like machine learning and the robotic process automation that really don't work unless you have data. So this is one of the things that I just wanted to put out there as I know there was a lot of hype around big data. I don't know if it lived up to that hype or not. I think everyone's that sort of hype cycle is over and it's past. But I do want to make the point that data still is really important. No matter how much it's been sort of overhyped and mishyped in the past, I think you can see from the list here of all the things that organizations are trying to do, trying to become. Predictive analytics is something that everyone's working on. As an example as well, data is still important and it's still foundational to everything that we do. So I think that sort of sets the stage for the rest of the webinar. So next slide, some of the key topics we're going to talk about today are some of the dimensions of a data strategy. So basically, what are the components that make that up? How to assess your current state of where you are. A little bit of talk around data ownership and governance, which is a key topic. Security and compliance, I think, should be involved in any data presentation. It's really one of the keys, especially in today's environment. How to address data quality. Some tips about how to go about selecting data tools and what that process could look like. Integrating third-party data is another topic that has become really critical from a data perspective. And then how to develop a timeline, how to plan this all out, put all these different components together and sequence it. And then last but not least, how to measure your results. So dimensions of a data strategy. Here are the different components that I think are really foundational as you're developing that data strategy. So one of the first things is identify. So basically, you're taking an inventory of the data that you have, and then you attempt to understand. And so what that's really about is getting everyone together and agreeing on the common language. I work in insurance currently. We have a whole bunch of insurance-specific terms, and they mean something different to every person in the organization. And so one of the key activities is sort of getting everyone together, agreeing on a common definition, and documenting it. So basically going out, making sure you understand what data you have, and identifying it. I will say this is not easy. So I think everyone says, oh, some of this stuff is going to be easy. Some of this is going to be easy, but a lot of it's just going to be hard work. So I want to put that out there up front. So prepare talks about the efforts that make data fit for use. So I think this would historically be some of the ETL, so the extract, transform, and load. And then there's also a movement that's more cloud-based with it goes to ELT, which is extract, load into the cloud, and then transform there. So there are pros and cons of each approach. Storing and securing is about identifying where the data lives and how it's protected. So these are some of the different protection strategies around the data. So if the data is encrypted at rest, if it's encrypted in motion, things like that. If you're storing EU-based data, is it stored in the EU? Is it stored in the US? Different states within the United States have certain regulations around where the data is physically stored. All these types of considerations come into play under store and secure. Use. So basically, what are you going to do with your data? So you have it, you've landed it somewhere, it's secured, you've prepared it for use, but then what are you going to do with it? And so I think now one of the key things is how are you going to share that data? Who are you going to expose that to, whether internally within your company or perhaps externally in the market? How you're combining it with other sets of data to become more valuable is another key activity. And then all while maintaining a single version of the truth. So making sure your figures match. You're looking at the data in one place versus the data in another place. You ask the same question, you get the same answer, is a really critical thing in terms of integrity. And then last but not least, the other dimension of a data strategy is about governance. So a lot of people think governance and they're like, okay, this is your list of do's and don'ts. My view of governance, although it includes some aspect of that, to me it's more about facilitating the communication around both the meaning, so what does this individual data item mean, and how is it going to be used throughout the organization. And I think one of the most important things that you can get from that is understanding what is the impact. So if I change the use of this data element or adjust it somehow or transform it differently, who else in the organization will be impacted and how? And so it's really about making sure that before we make sweeping changes, everyone who would be impacted has a seat at the table and they're discussed, communicated, and planned for. No one, I think probably everyone on the call, on the webinar, has probably had the experience where someone changed something, they thought it didn't impact anyone else, and all of a sudden you're scrambling on whatever day it is, Monday morning after a weekend change, maybe a midweek change, you're scrambling to fix what's been done there. So an important part of any data strategy is around that governance and specifically around that communication aspect. So the first thing I think where everyone can start is in assessing the current state. So your goal here is to get a true baseline of where you are from a people perspective. So how are the people that you have? Do their skill sets match what you need? Your processes, how robust are your processes? Do they hold up when the auditors come in? Are they something that you can actually scale beyond what you're doing now as your data grows? Do they still work? Do they still hold up? And then your tools as well. So do we have the right technology in place to be successful? So I think what I've seen happen in a lot of organizations is everyone says, okay, we need an honest baseline of where we are. So what happens, and I can only say this because I'm in IT myself, a bunch of people in IT get together, huddle around a room, look at each other and say, yeah, I think we're doing a pretty good job. And that may be true. But the next point is really critical, and it's that you need feedback not just from your technologists, but you need feedback from your business leaders. So how are we doing from a capabilities perspective, when it comes to data? Do we have the data that we think we need? Can we answer the questions that we need to ask in order to run our business better? So that's why it's so important to get real feedback from business leaders and make sure it's not just purely, a bunch of IT folks sitting around a room nodding their heads saying, yeah, patting each other on the back and saying, I think we're doing it pretty well. Because IT could be doing it pretty well from an operational perspective. But if they're not aligned with the business, we'll miss the boat from a strategy perspective. And we may be providing data, but it may not be relevant. We may not be giving the data in order that our business leaders can ask and answer the right questions and things like that. Sometimes, I'm going to say not all the time, but sometimes, joint sessions can be an effective tool. So I think it's always best when you can have a dialogue with your business leaders and your technology professionals at the same time. Because I think with that, a business leader may have an idea. If it was just the business leaders, they might not be able to further that discussion. But with the technology folks in the room, someone may be able to speak to, is that possible? Or, you know what, we've actually done something similar for another business unit.